Thank you very much. I think I have the most difficult task here. Three very, very interesting and provocative discussions, presentations. Just to pick up on one of Nick's points that he made towards the end of his presentation, this issue of enabling governments to challenge what donors are coming up with in terms of project proposals. And the bank are doing some work on this in terms of guidance notes for governments to actually challenge what during the discussions with donor agencies, and looking particularly at the link with development outcomes. Earlier this year there was a guidance note published for the Pacific region, which is an area that has severe capacity challenges. So the idea was to provide some guidance to those governments and actually trying to bridge the gap between, the best practice that tends to run through what donors come up with and what is realistic in those very small countries. So looking, it seems to me that one theme that has come out, and this was obviously present this morning as well, was we seem as a group to be advocating a sort of more variegated or less linear approach to budgeting reform. We're looking at reforms that are focused more directly on how budgets and budget processes may be hindering the achievement of development outcomes, better services, but based on specific country circumstances. I think Matt talked this morning about the problem of lack of functionality. So in this approach, it's much less prescriptive, and it understands and takes into account political and institutional issues. It doesn't follow the notion of a linear approach from A to B, where B is best practice, advanced countries' best practice. The approach also is not afraid to be opportunistic and not afraid to ask the difficult questions. I think our colleague from Nepal talked about priorities, and that means choices, and politics coming in at that stage. So I think we are coming back, and we talk about we're coming back. We're looking at the same issues over time, and one of the issues is one size definitely does not fit all. I think that's come out quite clearly in our discussions. The prioritization, we talk about choices and prioritization of reform and prioritization of development outcomes. Whose priorities are we talking about there? Are they, this is where politics comes in terms of whose development challenges are seen as more important than others. So that is an issue that comes into the idea of prioritizing according to development outcomes. I think we talked some about accountability as well, and both Professor Schick and the Auditor General talked about the issue of instilling a culture of respect for budget process rules and enforcement of these rules. Many PIFA assessments show that budget credibility is very weak, particularly when it comes to between at the ministerial level. So, and the idea, you talk to budget staff, and they have deadlines. There are deadlines for aligned ministries to do various things through the budget cycle. And when these ministries don't adhere to the deadlines, you say, well, what is your response to that? And they shrug their shoulders. What can we do? So that is a very different, and I know that the Ghanaians were particularly impressed with South Africa when they went to the Ministry of Finance, and they said, people actually follow they adhere to the deadlines. They actually do what they're supposed to do. They were just amazed by this. And so this, it hasn't changed anything in Ghana, but the point was that they were amazed that it actually, that somebody does that. So, and I think one of the things in terms of accountability, we talk about the supply of information. So what information is made transparent, what is available, the timing of that, and the understandability of it. The question I would raise is, what about the demand for that information? You talk to civil servants who are also citizens themselves, and you say, do you provide this information to the public? And they look at you like you're completely mad and say, who would be interested in this? Well, you should be, number one. So I think it's not just a question of supply of information, it's also the demand. We have talked about capacity development, and I think one of the things that has come out is this issue of looking at it more broadly and more opportunistically, looking at a mix of different approaches, including the enabling environment for development of skills. Often, civil servants will go abroad for an extended length of time, and they will go and visit other countries' ministries of finance, and they'll come back and be very enthusiastic with all that they have learned, and they come right back into the same system that they left, and no changes, because the management process around that, they haven't changed. So their all that they learned and their experience gets lost because they have no way of using that. So the enabling environment, the management of this, is something that I think is important. Three short questions, really. Just thinking sort of more broadly. Professor Schick implied that the relationship between budgets and results should be more nuanced. I'd like to ask, how does this fit in a world where donors are demanding direct linkages between donor resources and results, often in very short time frames? So how do we marry that up? Secondly, and perhaps somewhat relatedly, given squeezes in donor budgets, what are the implications for donors of a less linear and more country-specific approach? Because one size fits all is a lot easier for donors to prepare. So what is the implication of that? And finally, and this is a broader point really, where the political and institutional imperatives for reform, as against the cost of doing so, maintaining the status quo. Civil servants want to maintain this status quo on the whole. They want their jobs to continue as they have been doing them. But I'd like to know, and this came up with, who cares? And I think Professor Schick mentioned about, civil servants demand, talking about, we care about providing better services. My question would be, for each country that we are working in, who in that country is demanding better public services? Where's the pressure coming from? Because we see that, during macro-fiscal crises, often there is an incentive for the politicians to act, and reform can often have more traction. The question is, when you look at services, if you're talking about service delivery, where is that pressure coming from? Civil society, citizenry, donors? That has, in the absence of that, why would governments begin to reform? Who is the ultimate? Who do they feel ultimately accountable to? If you have, as in Mali, as was, 6% of the population voting, how do they feel that they have a link with government's provision responsibility for providing services? It's a question about the reality of our expectation of accountability and democracy, and the reality, which is often much messier. Thank you.